The infinite. Yeah. Time to upland. Except berserk. Time to up the heal and fight on. Shadows, rise and fight. Perform the divine inspiration.
Hello and welcome, Exiles, to my Guardian Rakiatas Dance Spectral Throw character. Now, we're building around the new sword, Rakiatas Dance, specifically for an elemental-based character where we don't need too much investment into pen in order to have pretty decent elemental damage on monsters. Now, penetration still will help our damage, but it's not as mandatory as it is in other builds, and we can invest into other avenues of damage to more effectively scale ourselves with this weapon. We're combining it with the new Guardian because I believe Guardian can actually make a pretty decent attack-based character just looking at the face value of these nodes. 25 spell and attack block because I'm pretty much always attacking, and then I often use Crossblink to reposition. It's very good uptime. 25 block of each, I personally think, is very, very competitive for an ascendancy point. And then on top of that, we have another defensive node in Radiant Crusade, which is essentially kind of like 20% fortify. The main differences here is, one, I have to remember to cast him every 20 seconds. He only has a 20-second duration. And two, he can taunt enemies. And if he taunts an enemy, that means that enemy will additionally deal 10% less damage to me, or often just not even be targeting me. So there are some advantages, there are some disadvantages. Ultimately, just full uptime of Fortify might be a bit better, but honestly, in a melee-based character like I'm doing now, if I wasn't playing Spectral Throw, I could very easily put Fortify into the build and have Fortify and this 20% less damage taken effectively with my Sentinel of Radiance. So I think that's pretty cool for a node as well. So these are very defensive in nature. And then the bread and butter for our offense is Unwavering Crusade, which if you saw during the demo of those fights, we have fairly good uptime. It's not 100% consistent, but if you have a build that hits a lot, you're generally going to generate all three of those elemental aura relics, which you get a level 27 Hatred, Anger, and Wrath. Their Anger and Wrath is quite a lot of flat damage for us. It's better on basically like wand builds or one-hand builds like swords and stuff, but on a two-hander character, it works out pretty decently as well. And then Hatred, of course, is decent as on top of all that. So it's a decent amount of damage from those aura nodes. And then the last node, Time of Need. Although this node isn't ideal in terms of just sustain, it ends up being quite good, specifically because I'm transforming it into a regen for Rage. Rage is essentially, if I'm not losing my Rage in that 4-second window, it will be proccing and hitting me and shooting me all the way up to basically full Rage. So it's pretty consistent for that. And so it's a massive node we're grabbing just for really good uptime on Calm Spirit without having to really invest into it in my gear or on my tree. On top of all that, since I have the block here, I decided I want to take advantage of some of the new tattoos. And these are things I really like in this build. Stuff I want to try to use in future characters is this sort of concept here is something like a red nightmare where you're grabbing the starting nodes and you're just getting the res. So I'm getting 4 block for each of these nodes. And you'll see I have 3, 6, 8 nodes, 32 block, and I'm getting another block here. So we're getting 33 block just from this area here, along with getting a bunch of fire res. This allows us to, one, have a lot less gear pressure for our resistances, while also getting close to very good block. You'll see with this block and the block I have there, I end up getting to 64 chance to block attacks. I'm using a two-handed sword. Obviously, with a normal one-hand weapon shield build, you could easily cap your block. And with a one-hand weapon shield build, you could go Tempest Shield, and you probably could cap your spell block too, if maybe you tried a route where you fit in some spell block. That being said, for spells, I am taking another defensive layer, which is Suppression. And it's a similar concept. We're using Green Nightmare this time, which transforms 70% of cold res into suppression. So what I'm doing is I'm transforming the strength nodes into all res, which gives 2 suppress, 2 suppress. We're getting 7 suppress here. We're getting 12 suppress here. And then cold res nodes for 5 suppress, 5 suppress. So personally, I think these are some pretty good places for something like this here. You could also do, if you're starting as a duelist, you get suppress here. If you're starting as a witch, you could go and get spell block here or spell block here. You could go and get spell block as a shadow start. You could get suppress as a ranger start. This, I think, is ultimately a tool I'm going to use in more builds where I'm basically just picking up a nice defensive layer with red, green, or blue nightmare, depending on where I'm starting, to give me some just nice basically weigh into some really good additional defensive layers on top of our HP scaling, on top of our red scaling, on top of our other defenses, and I think it blends quite well. So that's kind of the idea there. Is although it's not necessarily ideal to start as a two-hand sword build on a Templar start, we have very efficient traveling going over to the more efficient area over here because we're picking up our defenses for block, we're picking up suppress, and it makes the rest of the tree just a little bit stronger because our travel really isn't that weak to begin with. On top of all of that, we are also combining in the new Makanga tattoo, which I'm trying out for additional proj. I'm not sure if it really ends up mattering that much for this character, considering we do have... Basically, I'm playing with GMP, so this is like 9 projectiles. It would be 8 projectiles. It's not like a tornado shot where it actually gives us more damage. It's just like a bit better on clear, and honestly, on single target, does it really matter if we're shooting out 4 projectiles or 3? I'm not really sure, so kind of probably a waste of money. Ultimately, I think the 80% max leech would probably be better here, considering my defensive setup for sustain is leech for my life pool, and I have regen for my ES pool. When I play a Palm Spirit build, I don't really like not having some form of regen, so to solve that, I'm mixing in a Pious Path in combination with Rational Doctrine while my strength's the highest. Essentially, all my regen that I would have on my ES pool, I have, or on my life pool, I have on my ES pool, which ends up being okay-ish. Ultimately, I don't have a lot of regen on the tree, so it's just kind of mediocre, and I don't have that much ES, so if I was going to change something or rework something in my build, I probably wouldn't end up going into this because it's kind of expensive and it doesn't really do that much, but it's part of the way I'm dealing with like, having any sort of constant degen by having some level of constant regen, because you can have your ES regen with Pious Path even though you're contributing your life regen into Rage Sustain, if that makes any sense. On top of that, we're getting ailment immunities through Crystal Skin in combination with the avoidance here, and then having avoidance on our boots. I'm a little bit overcapped because I forgot I get 10% avoid from this node. And then outside of that, the last but not least layer of this character is we are doing the Eternal Damnation Lore Weave, just a throwback to good old Sanctum League, the classic layer of getting 78 max all res along with Eternal Damnation to have very good mitigation on our elemental pool, on top of the suppress, on top of the block. It ends up being pretty decent. That being said, the one weakness of our character is ultimately we don't have that much armor. My gear is just not very good armor-wise, and I didn't end up getting that much armor on my tree. I probably should have got combat stamina. I do have percent armor on my small nodes on my ascendancy, but I think I'm a bit weak on the phys reduction side. That's probably the one hole in this character's defense. It's still fairly tanky, but there is a hole there, in my opinion. After all of that, Rakiatas Dance, it's a fairly strong weapon, but what does it lack? It lacks crit. And the way I am fixing that is through the new Dance with Death. You're probably wondering, why am I not wearing a helmet? Well, this keystone says you can't wear a helmet. But the upside is you get lucky crit if you remember the old Diamond Flask, which essentially it rolls for a crit twice. If you have a 50% crit chance, it will check that roll twice. Essentially, effectively, it will be 75% chance at the end of the day. For me, I think I'm at, crit-wise, offensively on my skill, I'm at... this goes up to around 70% once we have power charges, which we are generating power charges through Storm Rider node. But 70% lucky crit's about 90% effective, so it's fairly decent for us. And then after all of that, we are doing attack leech through Feed the Fury. Eventually, if I go and buy a Awakened Elemental damage support, we could go and get our mana leech here, but I was too cheap for that, so I'm just using the all quality that gives mana leech on elemental damage with attacks. After all that, the other bonus of Dance with Death is we are using Volatility, the new support gem that says, hey, your max roll number just gets a lot bigger, but your min roll number goes down. Effectively, when you're using something with a lot of lightning damage, you'll see the roll is 1 to 585 on this weapon. So if you have Volatility here, the 585 is getting multiplied by 58% more, which is massive. And then the 1 is getting a 68% less damage, which is like barely any downside. That being said, the 68% less damage also applies to cold. So it's going to affect my cold damage, it's going to affect my fire from anger, but then there's wrath with another big roll range. So ultimately, Volatility is mostly pretty good upside. And then the great thing about having a large range or damage range is when you have Dance with Death, you have lucky damage, which is rolling for that damage twice. So if you have 1 to 1,000, the first roll is 100, the second roll is 500, the hit will deal 500 damage instead, the higher roll. So that is the idea behind Dance with Death and an empty helmet slot. I'm not sure if Spectral Throw is the best decision because I've been told excuse me, I've been told that the deceleration enchant is actually pretty good for getting additional hits on Spectral Throw, I believe. So maybe not the best idea. I'm not really a Spectral Throw player. I don't know much about it. I only wanted to do it just because I think the weapon looks hilarious, and seeing the animation of the giant sword being thrown out was the main reason I chose Spectral Throw. You can play this sort of setup on this sort of character with pretty much any attack-based character, with any attack-based skill that works with a two-hand sword. You don't have to use Spectral Throw. I'm only doing it because that's what felt like a fun thing to do to me. I will also say this. I think another great angle for a Rakiatas build is probably a Slayer, thanks to the fact Slayer can fix the base crit, and then you can go for some different angles there. I wanted to try Guardian because it's new Ascendancy, and that's what I was doing. So anyways, I think this breaks down most of the idea behind the character. I want to give you guys a quick little showcase of what it looks like during a map. One downside, or one thing I personally am not a fan of with Spectral Throw, is I feel the need when going from single target to clearing, I feel the need to do slower proj. It's not too necessary on most map bosses. This character has enough damage where T16s is not a big deal. But when we get into the things where we want to do Ubers, it starts to matter a lot, and you want to be weapon or gem swapping for maximum DPS, or at least it feels that way to me. Anyways, let's go ahead and get in and do this rocks, give you a little showcase of what it looks like while map clearing. And then, yeah, you guys can decide for yourselves whether or not you think the build is cool. I don't think the gear on my character is particularly OP. I spent most of my money crafting my one ring, and then at some point I was using the Calandra's ring, which I bought as an investment, and people kept telling me my build was too expensive, and I decided, you know what, screw the Calandra's ring. I went and bought a 100C ring off trade that just fixed my res, gave me a little bit of accuracy I needed, had some wet on it. I just chucked that on because the thing is, you might be wearing an expensive ring like Calandra's, but Calandra's is only good as the ring it's copying, and the ring I was copying really wasn't that great. I kind of settled a decent amount on it when crafting it. It was just a matter of I didn't want to craft another ring. But in order to get away from the people that were talking smack about how expensive my build was, because I just happened to have Calandra's on because I didn't want to craft another ring, I bought a 100C ring that does virtually the same thing as my Calandra's was doing me, and it helps fix my accuracy better than my Calandra was, because my Calandra was copying a ring that didn't have accuracy on it. Anyways, let's go ahead and just clear through this map, and I will say, in my opinion, Rakiatas, I think it's a great weapon. I think Void Forge is probably stronger, and a really well-crafted Rare is probably stronger, but in terms of taking this to the end game content, yesterday on this character, we did all the Ubers except for Cirrus. Cirrus, I failed hard on the degen ground, but I think that was more of an issue with playing Spectral Throw. Spectral Throw is probably one of the most melee skills possible when you do slower proj. My range is pretty much this, which almost any melee skill with Ancestral Call or a lot of the other melee skills, you get a farther range than that, so it felt pretty questionable trying to chase down Cirrus when he kept teleporting off screen. I didn't play it great either. I got a little bit frustrated, as you could imagine, doing the Cirrus fight, but I still think if I was maybe approaching it with a different ability, there's a decent chance I could have done it. I chose Spectral Throw though, because that's what I wanted to see, the giant Rakiata sword being thrown, and that's what we went with. Where is the boss? Here's the boss. Just a little showcase. We'll kill the boss with the GMP. Okay, there's the boss. Like, we still obviously have the damage to do some T16 maps. It's not like gonna stop us from killing monsters having the GMP versus the slower proj. But I'll give a little like contrast now of what slower proj looks like on Drox to give you an idea that yes, it does still make a difference. Obviously our damage ramps, I couldn't tell, but our damage does ramp quite a bit faster when we have this slower proj. Now he has the damage reduction phase, but it shouldn't matter too much. We should still be able to kill him pretty handily, especially when he comes out of that. And a fate worse than death. I am now 3/4 of the way to my Cortex card, I guess. I think I've dropped this 2 other times. Anyways, that is my Spectral Throw Guardian. I like this build a decent amount. I'm not convinced my Rational Doctrine Pious Path was the right play. I think this was ultimately adding expense, and it wasn't really that good. So I probably would swap those out for Rare Jewels or a different Forbidden Flesh and Flame. Good news is that's an expensive part of the build that you can drop, because I don't really think it was that good. And then on top of all that, The rest of the character, I did enjoy doing this stuff with tattoos. I think this is quite strong. I'm going to use this sort of tech in future builds because I think it's very, very convincingly good to add in block or spell suppress into a build that previously really couldn't get quite enough. Essentially, all you need is any starting location where the jewel node is within range of these starting nodes, because the starting nodes are kind of weak to begin with. So when you're trading out the starting nodes for basically this stuff, it ends up pairing quite nicely. So essentially this location here for the duelist, this location here for the marauder, this location for the Templar, this location for the witch, this location for the shadow, this location for the ranger, all that stuff pairs quite nicely. A spot like here for suppress works well if you want to do a Templar, or not Templar, sorry, a Scion start in this area, or if you're just pathing through here, this is where you get Mage Bane, this is where you get reflexes. Honestly, I should be taking Mage Bane in this character because I do have 150 dex, so that's about 15 spell suppress there. So, or not 15, that's about 10 spell suppress there. Currently, my character has 72 spell suppress with lucky, which is about 90%. If I went to 80, I'd be like 95 lucky or something. I don't know the math. Maybe it's 96, not 100% sure. The point is, that is the character. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video on my Rakiatas Dance Spectral Throw Guardian. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care, and peace out.